I'm excited to meet with you today, excited to talk about this topic. Um, First of all, I learned this from one of my colleagues, this idea of putting, your information on the front. If you have any questions about the things that we talk about today, please, here's some contact information. Please feel free to reach out. And if you have any questions, concerns, whatever else it might be. The other reason to do this, quite frankly, is we've got a lot of people that don't understand what it is that our team on the leadership and organizational development team, what we do and what we can do for your teams, for your leaders, for your organization. And so we want to make that, we want to do a better job of advertising what it is, who we are, and what it is that we do. So we're here to talk today, though, about organizational pride. And we will get to organizational pride, which I think is something that is very useful, often misunderstood. We'll talk a little bit about that. But before we do, I want to make sure that you are aware of next month, which is the webinar, the off the shelf we're going to be doing next month on October 26th. Get this on your calendars: Painless Performance Reviews with Tara Connolly and JJ Acker. I'm not going to read all the bullet points for you there, but I'm not sure there's a more timely or more relevant topic that's got a lot of us feeling anxiety right now. These will all be recorded and available on our YouTube page. It's going to be great. You can see there what they're going to cover. I'm really excited for you to be able to take advantage of that and to be able to participate in that. So Painless Performance Reviews. So let's go ahead and get started with organizational pride, this tool that sometimes we don't realize is in our toolbox, and we need to take advantage of it. The best way I can describe this, I think, is this topic is it scratches an itch that I've had for a long time in terms of understanding what it is in particular that I am concerned about leaders not feeling, or leaders not being able to help their organizational members feel. And I remember this was probably a few years ago, it dawned on me, this term, organizational pride. I said, really what we're talking about is we need more organizational pride. And I thought I'd coined this term. It turns out there's a fairly robust literature to it and research behind it. And so that's the good news. And that's some of the stuff we'll talk about. Now, I want to share with you quickly an experience I showed you just a few slides ago. There's my family there. My daughter there, she was 4 here. She's 5 now. And I apologize for those of you that I've shared this with, but I had an interesting experience with my daughter recently, which was she does this weird thing where she likes to, and apparently it's not that uncommon. She has her own room. We got 2 boys, girl. The 2 boys share a room. My daughter's got her room. She'll just shred paper and leave it around her room, it's my confetti and this. I'm just and she's up later than the rest of us, so we're not even aware. We're hey, we're going to bed, and she's up in her room playing. We're just hey, we're terrible parents. But I remember one time her cousin was over. Her cousin's about 8 years old. My daughter's 5, and they were playing in her room. And I've told her countless times, stop shredding paper. It bugs me to no end. And she had shredded paper again. And she and her cousin were in her room, and I said, look, Allie, her name is Allie, I'm like, you have got to stop shredding paper. If I see you shred paper again, you are, and I'm starting, going through the Rolodex of punishment. I'm like, you're going to be grounded. You won't be able to play with Greta for a week. And Greta's her best friend, right? She can't live without Greta. And she goes, Dad, how long is a week? It's well, it's Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. She goes, well, I'll see Greta on Sunday because we're in the same church community. So she's like, oh, I'll see Greta on Sunday. I'm like, well, yeah. And then I'm like, wait a second. Allie, are you telling me that you're just, despite me telling you not to, you're planning on shredding more paper? And she goes, I don't know, Dad. Life is full of questions. And I was like, my 8-year-old niece is looking at me like, what are you going to do with that? I'm looking at her like, hey, what do I do? How do I respond to that? I don't know. And so, yes, I'm a terrible parent, but my daughter's not wrong. Life is full of questions. And I want you to, I'm going to ask you a question here. I really want you to kind of role play with me here, right? I really want you to think about this for a second. Let's say for a second, you and a friend asks you to go to a work party with them. Okay, they're new on this job and they're having a work dinner, and they don't want to go alone. And since you're a good friend, you're like, okay, I'll go to this work dinner. And you go and you're supposed to meet your friend there. Well, you get there and your friend's not there yet. For those of us that are introverts, already this is a nightmare, right? But let's say you go, and of course people there, they're very nice, and they're like, oh, who are you? And you're like, oh, I'm here with so and so, you know, your new colleague or your new worker or what, you know, whatever, new employee. I think without question, as the dialogue progresses, at some point, some form of this question is going to come up. So where do you work? Now, I want you to think about this for a second. You're at this, you don't work with these people, whatever. I want you to think now, as you think about how you're going to respond to this question, how do you feel about answering this question? And I'm asking you to be introspective here, because this is not just a nice introduction to what we're talking about, but it's a litmus test of sorts. There are many of us, and I will admit this with some chagrin, where I have answered this question somewhat, for lack of a better term, sheepishly. Where I have said, I felt a little uncomfortable saying, oh, I work for the state. Or, you know, I work for the department, back then, the Department of Human Resource Management. And I've even qualified it. I said, oh, I just work for the Department of Human Resource Management for the state of Utah. And it's interesting because there are some people that would answer that same question, working in the same place, and would say it beaming with pride and are happy to tell people. And then there are other people that work for other companies. You know, I don't know if you work for Enron, you know, or you're like, I work for Enron. You know, I don't know if you're bragging about that. But this is an important question. And it gets to at the very beginning of us thinking about organizational pride. Now, I want to give another question. Remember, life is full of questions. What is it right now? We keep hearing these terms, the Great Resignation, quiet quitting is a new term. We're not, 10 years ago, we called it presenteeism as opposed to absenteeism. People are on the job, but they're just not doing much, right? We call it quiet quitting now, employee burnout. What is it that a leader, especially a leader for the state of Utah, what is it that they can do to combat what we're experiencing now, where workers are feeling burned out, or they have nothing but choices of places to work? And I want to make the suggestion to you that organizational pride might not be something that comes to the top of your mind when you think of things that you and I have to combat burnout, great resignation, quiet quitting, whatever else it might be. But it is something that's there, and it's something that we can have influence over, and it's an important part of the employee or organizational member experience. So this model that I'm going to share with you is going to be something you're going to see throughout our brief conversation today. Okay, we're going to talk about this model is going to be the most important visual that we have. So let me walk us through quickly this organizational pride model. The first thing are the first thing I want to talk about are these organizational characteristics, and they are perceived organizational competence, and we're going to define all of these, and perceived organizational virtuousness. Now, the evidence says, the research says, and I would argue even our experience says, to the degree that I perceive my organization as competent, the degree that I perceive them as being virtuous, the organization as being virtuous, is the degree to which I will have organizational pride. Now, specifically, we'll define this, and that is pride in the organization that I work for. Well, why does that matter? Why does this help us combat employee burnout, quiet quitting, the great resignation? It's because the evidence says that employee organizational pride leads to these two significant outcomes, which is increased employee task performance and employee organizational citizenship behaviors. Now, that fourth O there is citizenship behaviors towards the organization, but we'll just call it organizational citizenship behaviors. So this is the model. I think about the argument here, and what the science is saying is that those characteristics on the left, to the degree that I feel them, I feel pride. And when employees have pride in the organization they belong to, you get these two outcomes on the right. That's huge. That's massive. So let's talk quickly about employee organizational pride. Stay with me here as we define this, because it is different, and we need to specify what we mean by this, okay? So first, this is from, I think, the most important study that I've read so far, and by the way, the most recent, which is useful, Sturm, Jolly, and Williams. Read along with me here as we talk about organizational pride, referring to members' psychological tendency of favor towards their organization when they believe that the perceived performance or achievement of their organization exceeds expectations or social standards. In other words, pride, all forms of pride, but including organizational pride, are relevant to the society around us. We feel proud of things vis-a-vis other things. So if I belong to an organization that I feel really excels or really has the virtuousness and the virtues that are deemed admirable and noble in society, then to that degree, I'm going to have organizational pride. Okay. Now, Ron Friedman, I've shared his book a number of times. I think it's a great, quick read with a lot of science behind it. It says, well, look, it's one thing to enjoy working at a company and quite another to feel proud of it. So maybe many of us have had jobs where, like, in fact, I went to Subway the other day, and there's this kid who was really chatting me up. I'm like, who is this teenager that's like Mr. Social? You know, he like asked me how I'm doing. I say good, and we're done, right? And I make my order, but he's like chatting me up. I'm like, well, he's like, how's your day been? And I'm like, good. I'm like, how's your day been? And he told me, he's like, well, I had to mow the lawn and then I had to come to work. I'm like, okay. He's like, the work's not too bad. You know, we just kind of come in here and it wasn't that busy. So we get to do homework. It's pretty cool, actually. That guy enjoys his job because he just gets to do his homework there and everything. I don't know that he's like Mr. Subway. You know what I mean? I don't know that he's super proud of. So there's a difference here when we're talking about, I enjoy my job and I am proud of where I work. And Ron Friedman helps us identify that. One of the distinctions in this is how the important role that our organizational memberships, what role they play in our identity, right? So, for example, there was an interesting study done in 2008, in the 2008 election. And that those that had, because people have all these lawn signs, right, for candidates. When people had Obama and Biden signs in 2008 in their yards, they stayed up in their yards post-election much longer than those that had McCain, Palin signs in their yards. And because people were proud to have voted for the winner. Interestingly enough, this is unsurprising. The economic boom that a city experiences when they have a sports team that wins a championship or is highly successful is massive. The merchandise, you and I wear Jazz jerseys and Jazz clothes when they're in the playoffs, when they're relevant, when they're competitive, when we're proud of the Jazz. By the way, Jazz fans, don't plan on wearing much gear this year. Just be prepared for that, okay? But there is this part of our identity of who we are. Well, you don't often have people going around wearing, bragging and putting bumper stickers of where they work on their cars and things like that. But nevertheless, we know that our organizational membership is a big part of our identity, a big part of our ego, and a sense of who we are. Right. And so this organizational pride is really important. Now, look at this. I've shared this with a number of you in different venues, but I want to make a little bit of a leap here. And that is, McKinsey reported in 2020 that job satisfaction is the second most important determinant of an employee's overall well-being. Only mental health, right, is more important to overall life satisfaction. Just another argument here. Now, we're not talking about job satisfaction specifically. That's a different construct. But organizational pride tends to lead to job satisfaction. They overlap some. And I just want to make the argument here of this importance of the degree to which I can say, yeah, I work for the Department of Workforce Services. Yeah, I work for community culture and community engagement. I work for DHHS, whatever it is. The degree to which that's likely to lead to job satisfaction. And that is the second biggest factor in determining and in helping our life satisfaction outside of mental health. Massive implications for this stuff that we're talking about here, okay? Now, what it isn't. I want to be very careful here about what organizational pride isn't, because there is a form of pride, a dark side to pride, which is more what we would call, or Katzenbach here calls self-serving pride, which is, well, I make the most in the company. Or even I make more than my peer group in the company, and therefore I feel this pride. What we're talking about is a certain kind of institution building pride. So let me make one more case here. There are lots of people that have jobs that they hate and work for organizations they aren't particularly proud of or fond of because it allows them to have materialistic pride, right? They make a truckload of money. And so their pride comes from, I drive the nicest car in the neighborhood and I've got the biggest home. We're not talking about that kind of pride. As Katzenbach points out here, we're talking about an institution building pride. That is, we are doing something good that matters here. And therefore, I'm proud to tell people who we are and where I work, right? Another thing, just a quick distinction here on different kinds of pride. Sturm and Jolly again. There are lots of people, like, let's say your agency was in the news one time for something they did really great. There can be a form of pride that comes from that. That is emotional pride, but it's fleeting and it doesn't last very long. The kind of organizational pride that we're talking about today is called attitudinal pride. Like it says here, it tends to be longer lasting and it tends to be more holistic, right? Again, a part of our core identity. And so that's the kind of pride that we're talking about here. So that's a quick and dirty definition of what organizational pride is. Okay, so stay with me here. Let me know if there are any questions. Now, I'm going to go in reverse order here. Normally, I would say, okay, well, to get that employee organizational pride, we want to talk about the organizational competence. We want to talk about the organizational virtuousness. Let me talk about these things here, the results of this pride, first and foremost, because this is a big promise. The research on this is making big promises about, look, if you can get your employees proud of where they work, there's increased employee task performance, there's increased employee organizational citizenship behaviors. Let's talk about what we mean by that. So what is better task performance? Well, this is probably the most simple to explain, and you probably know it as I talk about it, right? One of the earliest studies on organizational pride, the two findings they had, this is back in 2011, was that people that experience organizational pride have lower turnover and tension. In other words, they're less likely to quit. They're less likely to leave. And that's important during the Great Resignation and quiet quitting and that sort of thing. But also think about what your agencies do. There's increased customer service. People who are proud of the organization they work for, want to represent the organization well. So when they interact with clients, customers, they represent the agency better. That's important for a public service agency, right? That's an important component. There's increased creativity, interestingly enough, when we're proud to work for the organizations. We're more likely to think and invest the time that creativity requires when we're proud of where we work. And then, quite frankly, in the most simple terms, we're more invested in accomplishing organizational outcomes. This greater performance or increased employee performance, improved employee performance, is I care about what it is that the agency is trying to accomplish. Therefore, I'm going to be more invested in it. In its most simple terms, what we're talking about here is increased motivation. And motivation, as we've talked about in other trainings, has three components to it, right? I call it the dip of motivation, that it's a good thing. You want employees, their direction, you want their motivation directed towards organizational ends. You want them to be intensely motivated. The evidence is when we feel organizational pride, that increases, right? And you want them to persist. Many of us are motivated to lose weight for like 3 days, right? But unless there is persistent motivation, it doesn't do us much good. And the evidence is when we feel the right kind of organizational pride, our motivational levels increase and the direction, intensity, and persistence towards accomplishing organizational ends increases. This is invaluable for you and me as managers and leaders in helping our employees reach their fullest potential, helping our teams reach their fullest potentials, right? So greater performance is pretty obvious there. This next one I'm going to spend a little bit more time on because I think it's not as intuitive to us, and it's employee organizational citizenship behaviors. So what do we mean by the citizenship behaviors in an organization? The argument is, again, task performance increases when we feel pride, and so do citizenship behaviors. By the way, this picture, I don't care how good a citizen you are or what a good job I did at work, I don't want that many hands on me at work. Like, that's like, okay, you guys are close enough, and that's too many people touching me at one time. But anyway, So what do we mean by organizational citizenship behaviors? This is a long explanation. Read along with me here. You'll find it's not from like the most scientific place in the world. I just love this definition as I try to explain citizenship behaviors to people, right? It's going about their business and doing things in a way that aren't included in the basic job description. It's people going above and beyond, right? It's usually manifested in our behavior in the workplace, and it makes, if you've got good organizational citizens, it's a good place to work. They make better teammates, right? And other people see their behavior. So you'll notice in this definition that I'm not going to read verbatim with you, but it talks about 5 key behaviors. Some of the earliest work on organizational citizenship behaviors identified these 5 behaviors. Now, I've changed some of the language because I think my titles here are more descriptive. But let's talk about these 5 really quickly. Number 1, I'm going to start with altruism or helping. And that is, if I'm a good organizational citizen and I've got altruism, I am out there helping my teammates even when it's not required of me. That may mean, oh, you need help with this project? Yeah, let me help you with that. And I'm gonna, by the way, I've not gotten permission to do this. I'm going to embarrass a colleague of mine. A couple of colleagues. One, some of you, many of you, most of you have heard webinars, off-the-shelf series done by a colleague of mine, Rick Murdoch. Well, Rick, just, I don't know how many days ago, I was doing these slides, and Rick can do slides in about 1/10 of the time that it takes me. And I was behind on getting these slides, and I'm like, look, Rick, I need this image, this model of organizational pride done. Would you mind just taking a credit? Yeah, sure. Here, let me do that for you. That's altruism. Okay, that's helping. And I think I can call out Rick, but I think that's true of a lot of members of my team. They're just like, yeah. Here, let me help you with that, right? So that's altruism. Then there's courtesy. Courtesy is exactly what you think it is. This is the person that at your work is considerate of others. This is the person that is like, you know what? We've got a meeting in here and we're starting to be kind of loud and there's cubicles right there. I'm going to close my door. Not for privacy concerns, but because we're being kind of loud in here. I don't want to bother them. That would be an act of courtesy. And we see that more in good organizational citizens. I've got another colleague that I think really demonstrates a lot of these behaviors. And if any of you know Jenny Wakefield, you would be like, oh, yeah, Jenny Wakefield does demonstrate a lot of these. Jenny is always one that's extremely courteous, but also always willing to help out with a project. She's like, oh, here, if you want me to take that, I'll that report, I'll write it up, and then you can look at it, even though we're both expected to produce it. Just things like that. I think Jenny Wakefield is a great example of these citizenship behaviors, including cheerful resilience. In the literature, it's called sportsmanship, which is really bizarre to me. But cheerful resilience is this: when something bad happens at work, including, let's say the organization makes a change that you don't like, good organizational citizens are more likely to say, hey, we're okay. Yeah, it's not the greatest thing that's happened, but we'll be all right. They are willing to give the organization and organizational members the benefit of the doubt, right? So this is huge. You can see why you want these people on your team. Conscientiousness, that 4th one, is simply, are you the person that is really concerned about the quality of the work? It kind of goes back to that first thing we looked at in terms of increased employee performance, improved employee performance. Those that are conscientious are the ones that really want to, they make sure that the work product goes out well. They're not afraid to come in early. They're not afraid to stay late, right? And then finally, the organizational cheerleader. Again, this is my term, right? But the idea is this: they are the people that are promoting your organization externally, bragging in a good way about your organization externally to those that they interact with, but also doing it internally, talking about how awesome the organization is. And this is important. Think about as we talk about the Great Resignation, quiet quitting, difficulty hiring people. You want these kinds of people out there saying, let me tell you of a really cool place to work. I am proud of my organization. Let me tell you why you should try and work there. That's invaluable. for recruitment and getting talented people. And then having organizational cheerleaders internally is invaluable for helping people find meaning and purpose and satisfaction and pride in the organization that they work for. Okay, so these are the organizational citizenship behaviors that we talked about. So we have there, stay with me, employee organizational pride. The right kind of pride leads to improved employee task performance and more organizational citizenship behaviors, which our organizations can't afford to be without right now. Now, let's talk about what it is that leads to that pride. So if we're going to say that pride leads to those good outcomes, well, what is it that gives an employee organizational pride? The research says there's two primary things. The first we're going to talk about is perceived organizational competence. Now, quite simply, this is the what. What do we do as an organization? What are we about? Right? So organizational competence refers to the perception of the organization's ability to effectively achieve its goals and objectives. Now, to be fair, right now, when we're talking about organizational competence, the purpose of the mission or the purpose of the organization matters less here. This is so. In other words, I'm going to leave this afternoon and get on a plane and fly to Chicago to go talk to a financial group. I'll be gone, I don't know, a little less than, I don't know, like 30 hours or something. But even for that financial group, who their job is to make people money, you know, it's not like, if you're a public servant, it doesn't seem like the most noble of ends. But even for them, when you talk to them about their organization, they are proud of their organizational competence, meaning we are good at what we do. This is why we exist, and we get things done, and we meet our goals. That's part of organizational competence, right? Now, I always get laughed at for doing this because I always bring up to people in live training and other things. We'll talk about, you know, how Utah is widely considered one of the best states. I love that fact, that Utah is always widely considered a really well managed state. And a big part of these rankings is, of course, education, healthcare, but how much the state gets accomplished with fiscal responsibility is a huge part of this. And to be honest with you, I don't think we, as employees of the state and the very executive branch agencies that we belong to, I don't think we take enough pride in how well run a state Utah is. And I say that because I don't want to offend anybody, but I grew up in Hawaii the first 25 years of my life. And I wasn't super aware then, but as I go back now, I'm just like, oh my gosh, this is a disaster. And even if you talk to residents of Hawaii now, they're like, oh no, this is not well run. They're fully aware of that. Utah is a very well-run state, and a large part of that is because of the work you and I are doing as state employees, as members of our agencies. And I don't think we take enough time to appreciate that. So really what we're talking about here when we talk about the what is, we have KPIs, even if we call it by other names. How good are our organizations at accomplishing their purposes? I would say really good. I would say on the whole, we do things with very few resources, and we, not that the job is ever done, but I think our agencies do a remarkable job of serving the citizens of the state of Utah. Okay. Are we efficient with the assets that we've been given? Well, if you look at the rankings from U.S. News and World Report and other rankings, yeah, the state of Utah does a great job, a superb job with accomplishing its ends while being very fiscally responsible in its government, right? And then finally, another way that we judge our organizational competence is just by looking at the people around us. Do we think they're talented? Do we think that we have the competencies in place to accomplish the goals that are set, that we have set for ourselves as an organization, as an agency? It's these things together that are going to give me this sense of, yeah, my organization is competent. Now, I would say too often we are cynical in the state of Utah about what our agencies accomplish, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. That's not a public sector problem only, but I think it's exacerbated in the public sector for sure. Okay. So now this thing I spent, competence is a little easier to explain. Let's talk about perceived organizational virtuousness for a second, because it's a little weird. Most of the time we don't think about organizations being virtuous or not, right? And yet this is not my language. This is from the research on organizational pride. So again, from I think the most recent research, most thorough research on this, organizational virtuousness is the who are we as an agency? Right, and this refers to individual collective behaviors, as well as our culture, our structure, the process, the routines, and the encouragement that encourage the enactment of virtuousness. And now here we're getting a little sticky here, a little vague. I'm fully aware of that. Virtuousness is considered to be the best of the human condition. There are lots of things that we could identify that might equate to virtuousness. And we don't have time, nor is there one universal list. These are the 37 things that equate to virtuousness. But again, it's a little bit like the often used phrase, overused phrase now, we know it when we see it. And so what are some things that might make an organization virtuous? Well, on the studies and the surveys that you see, these are some of the most common things. Do I perceive that my organization is honest? Does it have some sort of transcendent meaning or purpose? Is there caring and giving behavior in my organization? Do people express gratitude? Do they have a sense of hope, of positivity? Is there empathy between organizational members and between organizational members and the customers that they're serving? And are people treated as if they have inherent worth? These are just a few of the things that might qualify for this definition of virtuousness, right? Now, let me give you three more things here. Now, stay with me here. This is going to be funky language on what virtuousness is, right? As we define virtuousness. One is, it's called the eudaimonic assumption. Please do not remember that. Please don't worry about that, right? Greek term, right? It's from Aristotle. But it's this assumption that all human beings have this tendency towards virtue, that virtue has intrinsic value. And in fact, there is really interesting stuff about, there are evolutionary reasons why we value virtuousness, because it allows us to thrive societally rather than individualistically. And so we honor and value those that behave virtuously because it allows a society to thrive and survive, okay? So that's the first thing. The second thing is that there is inherent value to virtue. In other words, virtuousness is its own reward. The second I say this, I'm like, hey, guys, you know what? Let's act virtuously in our organization, because then we can really take advantage of our employees and really get them to work. It ceases to be virtuousness, right? It has to be the end in and of itself, not a means to an end. And then the third thing is that, and this is really important for our concluding discussion here, is observing virtuousness actually creates this self-reinforcing cycle, if you will, of more virtuousness. We see it, and because it's admirable and something that society admires and is evolutionary beneficial, we say, okay, we're going to behave that way. Now, that's absolutely critical as we try and increase the virtuousness in our organizations. So these are three more. We're just trying to tease out here this definition of virtuousness. Stay with me here for a little bit more about the who. What is organizational virtuousness? The benefit that we have in the public sector is this idea of external virtuousness. Now, this organization that I'm going to go meet with in Chicago tomorrow, they have internal virtuousness, I think they would argue, but we can experience external virtuousness. That is, the very missions and purpose of our organizations is public service, right? And so there, I can say, I work for the division, I'm with Health and Human Services, right? You know, whatever else it is. I know that what we are trying to accomplish is virtuousness in and of itself. Similarly, if I become a member of an organization, I'm going to see how they talk about, how they view, how they treat the service recipients or the customers that we have. And that will tell me, that will inform me of this organization's virtuousness. Now, not every organization in the world has the same mission or purpose that we do in our agencies, right? Like this company I'm going to go talk to, it's to make money. But there is an internal sense of virtuousness. That is, how are people treated? Even during rough times, interesting studies, you guys, I'm not going to get into too much detail, but during the economic downturn, like 2008, 2009, studies done on those organizations that were seen as virtuous when they had to do reductions in force, and the overall response of those surviving members who did not get fired or riffed or laid off or whatever you want to call it, massive difference, including, for what it's worth, the profitability of those organizations that were seen as virtuous in the way they treated people that were being riffed, laid off, whatever, and how hard they tried to avoid it, etc. It matters to people. And this, of course, speaks to our organizational culture, right? Who we are as an organization, our values, our patterns, our routines, are the events that we have, the way we communicate with one another. All these things speak to the organization's virtuousness. So here is that model. Now, remember the argument. I see my organization as competent. I see them as virtuous. I'm going to feel proud to work there, and I'm probably going to have better performance, and I'm going to be a better organizational citizen. Okay, that's kind of the bottom line argument. But how? Why is it that those two things on the left lead to that thing on the right that lead to those things on the end? Let me go through this quickly. Two primary reasons that my sense of pride would lead to better performance, more organizational citizenship behaviors. Two reasons. One is prescriptive norms. In other words, when I see people around me as being competent and really concerned about accomplishing goals and being effective in their jobs, and when I see them treating people well, being virtuous, it cues me in on how I am supposed to behave. Okay, I'm being socialized. I'm part of an organizational culture here that is competent and virtuous, and that's how we act. So I start to get in line, right? So the second one is interesting, though. I'd never thought of this. Being proud of something is a good feeling. You and I, whether your employees articulate it this way or not, whether you and I articulate it this way or not, we want to be proud of where we work. And so when I feel a sense of pride because I see my organization as being competent and I see it as being virtuous, guess what? I want to perpetuate that. I want to continue to make it an organization that is worthy of that esteem, that is worthy of that pride. And so I give more effort in my job. I contribute to those organizational citizenship behaviors because I want it to continue to be a place that is worthy of pride. It's really kind of interesting, right? And that's all that this research says here, that employees who experience organizational pride will likely have greater performance and engage in citizenship behaviors because these behaviors will further elevate the value of the organization. I'm proud of this. I want to keep that going, right? Okay. So now we conclude with two things. What are the challenges of doing this in the public sector? And what is it that you can do right now as a leader to increase the sense of competence, increase the sense of organizational virtuousness, so that your people feel proud, you and I feel proud, and it leads to those good outcomes we talked about. I bet if we were having a live discussion right now, you could answer these questions about, if I were to say, well, is this more or less challenging in the public sector? I'm going to share with you some things, research quotes from research that I've shared before. I share them often because I think they are so incisive to some of the challenges we face. This is as far back as 1991, which freaks me out that that's over 30 years ago, by the way. But think about this. It's totally true. Ban and Riccucci are two public administration scholars. One of the great paradoxes of American public service is that the citizenry, which regularly depends upon government services, has a cynical view of government. No group is more maligned by the public than those who serve the public. I don't want to overstate this, but I think it is simply undeniable that it is, some people have called it bashing the bureaucrat, or, shredding government apart, and people that work in government is the national pastime, things like that. I don't want to overstate that. I don't want to play martyr for any of us, but I think it's also just silly for us to ignore that reality. That the very people that are the recipients of the services very often that we try to provide are oftentimes the people that are bashing and ripping apart those that have chosen careers in public service. There's no question, as you and I are trying to create help our people feel organizational pride, that reality increases the challenge for us as we try and help them feel, especially because remember, they're not likely, you and I are not likely to get the other form of pride. In other words, we're not driving usually the nicest car in the neighborhood. We're not the richest people because we've decided to work for government. So it's really difficult when we can't help them feel proud about what they're doing, okay? Similarly, what's the result of that? Robert Lavinia at Wisconsin-Madison said this: these attacks that Ban and Riccucci just talked about, they erode employees' pride in their agencies. This is the problem. And that impacts engagement, right? It's hard to be proud of your work or your organization and yourself when you're constantly being criticized, especially by those that you're trying to serve. There's just no question. You and I think have a great opportunity to help people feel proud of where they work, because of the missions and purposes and the good cultures in the places that we work. But also we're up against it because of the public sentiment towards government employees on many occasions. Okay, so what are you going to do? That's great that we've identified these challenges here, but what is it that you and I can do? You know the answers already. If you're trying to help your organization, people in your organization feel proud because they see the organization as being competent and because they see it as being virtuous. This is what the research says that you and I need to do. An organization's senior leaders should ask supervisors to seize opportunities to highlight the organization's competencies and virtuousness within their work units. Even something they go as mundane as something like department or team meetings, right? In order to promote organizational pride and in turn increase individual task performance and citizenship behaviors. You and I, as leaders with formal authority or as leaders without formal authority, need to be promoting the competence and the virtuousness of the organizations that we belong to. Help people see what it is that we're accomplishing. Help them see the virtuousness of the missions and purpose of the organizations that we have, and the virtuousness of the cultures that we're trying to create in our organizations. From an earlier study, I gave you some data from earlier 2011. To increase organizational pride, employees have to be reminded repeatedly of whom they are and for whom they are working for. You are a valued member of a team that accomplishes a lot, that does a lot, that in spite of criticism is doing an amazing job of efficiently using public resources to serve the public. Are your people being told that? Are they being told that they're amazing for choosing careers in the public service where they're never going to get rich, where they're going to be serving people, where they're going to be serving under difficult circumstances on occasion, because they're getting the criticism from the other side? Are they getting the positive from you and me as leaders, right? And I've shared this many times in a lot of different trainings because I think it's really kind of damning to you and me as leaders in the public sector, that we should be encouraging public employees to feel that they are personally contributing to an organization that performs a valuable service. Right now, some of you are saying, this is so no duh, Dan, that I don't know why we need to be here to talk about this, right? But look at what it goes on to say. The research also suggests the importance of communicating to public employees the centrality of their role in the organization. This is why you matter to us. This is why you matter to this important purpose and the real benefits that their contribution makes to society. Listen to this. This is the damning part. An organizational trait that is currently unfamiliar to many public employees. There's just no question in my mind that you and I don't take seriously enough the challenges to organizational pride that exist in the public sector, and therefore don't do enough to compensate for that internally in our organizations by connecting people to competence in the organization, helping them see it, and connecting them to organizational virtuousness. This is exactly what I think we need to do, right? So what can you do? Grand narratives. Meaning, this is who we are as an agency. This is what we've accomplished. Now, it's very chic right now. It's very trendy to talk about the future, to talk about disruption and changing how we do things. And that's all great and good, and that has a place. But one of the interesting things about this research is it says, no, part of what you need to do to help people feel organizational pride is connect them to what has been done historically in your agency, in your organization. Connect them to the things that you have accomplished, that you have done, the big grand narratives of who you are and what makes you competent and virtuous and a worthwhile organization that they can be proud of. Share that history with them. That's something. Then there's the more daily narratives of the micro examples that we see of organizational competence and organizational virtuousness. This narrative sharing needs to be a part of what we do formally, like meetings as we talked about, but informally, how we communicate with one another. Do a better job of saying, here are our goals for the year, the quarter, whatever it is. Look at what we've accomplished. This is how many welfare cases we're taking care of. This is how many trainings we've done. This is how many customers were served. Whatever those KPIs might do, we got to celebrate when those goals are met. Because again, it's with a great deal of efficiency that we're accomplishing these things. That second to last thing there is increased contact for service recipients or customers and the people that are providing the service. It can be a really proud moment for people. It's funny. I've never worked for JJS, but I've done a lot of work with JJS folks, and they talk about when they get a letter from a youth that had gone through one of their facilities or something that is now a contributing member of society, has a family, has a job, right, is on the right side of the law, and shares with them, hey, thank you for your influence over me. Can you imagine how proud you must feel when you get that letter from that beneficiary of what it is that you do in JJS, just as an example? I can't imagine the sense of pride they must feel. Well, we don't do it. We have a lot of agencies that are serving the public, but they don't work directly with the public. And we have to do a better job of connecting them to the recipients of what it is that they're doing on a day-to-day basis. And then interestingly enough, in that 2020 study that I keep referring to here, quite frankly, if we want more virtuous organizations, almost nothing is as impactful as having virtuous leaders. And that's virtuous leaders, virtuous people of influence throughout the organization. People that set that example for that both external virtuousness that we identified and that internal virtuousness that we identified. That's really, if you and I are looking to help people feel more organizational pride, these are the things that we can do. And these are not novel. This is not rocket science, but we need to do more of it. We need to be more conscientious about doing it. Okay. So again, this is our organizational pride model. Perceived competence, perceived virtuousness leads to employee pride. And when our employees are proud of where they work, there's increased task performance, there's increased organizational citizenship behaviors. And when they're those things, they perpetuate and they become even better places to work. And we can become even more proud of where we work. And we won't have to go to that dinner party and be like me and sheepishly say, oh, I just work for the state, right? Or some nonsense like that. We can, with pride, have our people say that, yeah, I work for this agency or that agency, and here's what we do, right? I think that's immensely important. And there's just no question, in this day and age in particular, helping our people feel pride is going to help us resist, for lack of a better term, the great resignation, quiet quitting, employee burnout, all these things that we're reading so much about now that are very real, right? That are very real, but that so many organizations are experiencing. So reminder quickly, as I let you go, of next month, painless performance reviews. This is going to be immensely practical and useful. So put this on your calendars. You'll get a link today or tomorrow when we send you an evaluation and we send you the video of this recording. Sign up then, or you'll get a statewide email as we send out some of our training offerings. Sign up then if you need to, but you're not going to want to miss this. So organizational pride, I will stick around. I just saw Mike with the question there. I'll stick around for a bit to answer questions that anybody might have or to chat. But thank you, everybody, for your time and attention. And let's go help people feel proud about working for the state of Utah and for your particular agencies.
Thank you, Dan.
Yeah, thanks, Solomon. Appreciate it. Mike, I am going to answer your question. If you're still on here, generally speaking, organizational pride, OCBOs, I don't like the O, I always just talk about OCBs, but organizational citizenship behaviors, in the research, if you want to talk about it generically, it's think about your people that are really great co-workers. They are good organizational citizens. So they're altruistic, meaning they're the ones that help out a colleague that needs it. And these are what are called extra role behaviors, meaning it's not in my job description. I could keep my job if I didn't do these things. But good organizational citizens are like, oh no, my coworker needs help with the project. I'm going to help them, right? I'm going to be there for them to help them out. There is conscientiousness, meaning they're the ones that are like, no, we need to do our work well. Even though I could get away with doing a sloppy job here, or I'm going to be the one that comes in on time. I'm going to be the one that stays late if we need to. There is, the literature called it good sportsmanship, but I call it I forget what I called it in the slide. I'll go back here, but like this cheerful resilience, or I can't remember if that's what I called it, but here we go. Cheerful resilience, meaning, okay, the organization is going through a change that I don't like. That's okay. I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt here. Or we're going through tough times economically. I'm still going to stick with the organization, be cheerful about it. We can handle this, right? Courtesy is exactly what you think it is. It's and this is maybe less relevant now that we telework so much, but especially for people in the office, are you eating your, I don't know, your stinky lunch. I don't know. Are you cleaning out the microwave in the break room? People that have courtesy, of course, are the ones that are like, no, this is a public area. I'm going to clean it out. And then the org cheerleader is the person that's like, hey, we're awesome, right here. This is a great place to work, and they do that both externally and internally to people who don't work in the company, which is immensely valuable, right? And then also to people who do work in the organization or the agency, and say, hey, this is why we're awesome. So you want those org cheerleaders. Mike, did that answer the question at all?
Yep, that's perfect, Dan. Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks, Mike.
Yep, thanks for your sharing your insights with us. Great job.
Yep, good to see you. Any other questions or anything? Okay. Appreciate that, Mike. Thank you. Well, we will go ahead and we can probably stop recording, and we'll let you all go, and we'll see you next month for sure for that next off the shelf, because that's going to be a good one. So thanks everybody. Appreciate it.